Okay, I'm very excited about this. So hello and welcome. My name is Andy Chris, and I am very pleased to welcome you to this episode of Illinois Wesleyan University's Titan Talks webinar series. I'm really pleased that you're able to join us tonight. Tonight's episode is brought to you through a really interesting collaboration at Wesleyan tonight. It's the Office of Alumni Engagement, the Pride Alumni Community, and the School of Theater Arts. So there's some nice partnerships there. I'll start with a bit of housekeeping for those of you at home. All guests are muted and your cameras are off. There will be a brief Q&A after the conversation that is had. So please use the chat tool throughout the evening to send any questions you may have, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. Also, this webinar will be recorded and added to the other Titan Talk recordings that are posted on the Illinois Wesleyan Alumni website for your future viewing, or if you want to send somebody this way because it was fun. Now, for the main event, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing both our interviewer and our interviewee this evening. So let me start with our host. I'm about to introduce you to Hannah Dhue. Hannah is joining us as a class of 2015 English and Theater Arts BA alumna. There she is. Hi, Hannah. She serves as the Communications Committee co-chair for the Pride Alliance community, as well as a member of the Young Alumni Council. After 6 years of living with her partner in LA, she has recently been promoted to the manager of TV mastering at the Walt Disney Studios. So it's so cool and neat that you're here, Hannah. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you very much, Andy.
You're so welcome. Let's introduce the man of the hour. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Bill Damaschke from the class of 1985 at Illinois Wesleyan. Bill is the Tony Award and Golden Globe nominated producer of the Broadway musical The Prom and the Netflix Ryan Murphy film of the same name. He is also the producer of the Broadway smash Moulin Rouge, the musical, which played to sold-out houses prior to the pandemic and has been nominated for 14 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Bill graduated, as I said, from Illinois Wesleyan with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Music Theater. He had a successful career as an actor on both coasts before spending 20 years at the Dreamworks animation company, most recently as the chief creative officer, where he led the creative, artistic, and operational direction of that company. Bill's ascension at Dreamworks is one of those great stories, starting as a PA and on in Dreamworks' first animated movie, The Prince of Egypt. And I suspect some of that might get talked about tonight, and then eventually worked his way up to this chief creative officer position. In his tenure, he oversaw the release of some of the company's major films, including Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, and How to Train Your Dragon. He also oversaw all of Dreamworks Animation's live theatrical productions, including the award-winning Shrek, which was Broadway, national tour, and the West End. Almost done. Through his own company, Story Key Entertainment, Bill is currently working to bring back Moulin Rouge to Broadway, now that there is a light at the end of the COVID-19 tunnel, while simultaneously launching productions in Australia, London, and a national tour. Additionally, Bill is developing a yet-to-be-announced animated movie for Netflix. So other than that, he's just laying around eating bonbons all the time. There he is. There he is. Bonbon. Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, Andy. Hi, Hannah.
It's so good to see you. I'm going to let you guys take it from here, and I'll turn up at the end, and we'll have some questions from the audience.
Great.
Take it away, Hannah.
Well, thank you again, Andy. And as I've been told, Bill and Andy go way back, so that end discussion, I think, will be very interesting for all. But welcome, Bill. I just wanted to, well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Paige, our PAC co-chair, for curating and running our slideshow that I think everyone will be seeing shortly. So Bill, first, I just wanted to ask how you've been since we last spoke. I know there's been a lot of good news coming out recently, so just wanted to check in.
Yeah, thank you. I'm good. It's every day feels like a month. This past year and a couple months have all, there's so much information every day, but there seems to be a lot of good news, including even the CDC today announced that vaccinated individuals don't have to wear masks indoors or outdoors. We announced the return of Moulin Rouge to Broadway this morning. We'll be starting performances September 24th. Tomorrow, we're announcing the London company. So there just seems to be a lot of good news in terms of vaccine rollouts. The curve of the actual virus seems to be heading, at least in the US, in the right direction, downwards. And so, yeah, it's good. There seems to be a lot of hope and a lot of excitement about getting people back to work and getting theater back up and running, which, we've all been without for a long time now.
Absolutely. I know I'm extremely excited to just be in the presence of people again. So I was very excited to hear that announcement today, as you said. So first of all, I just wanted to mention when I was a freshman, you came and gave a talk at McPherson. That was about 2011, I think. And you were there for the world premiere of Puss in Boots, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I was very shy and didn't say anything at that talk, but I wanted to just mention how cool it is to have you here for this, because sitting there at that talk, I remember just thinking, wow, if someone could come from where I'm sitting now to be doing what you were doing at that time even, and now your career has just continued to blossom. So I wanted to say that, and speaking to the rest of the prospective students and recent graduates that are listening, thank you for joining us and for giving us your time. So first, moving on to our first question, can you tell me about your ambitions growing up? What did you think you wanted to be, and when did it first become clear to you that you wanted to be involved in entertainment?
Yeah, I think I started maybe with very low ambition. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and so I think my first ambition was just to have my own room one day. But my dad is a big old movie buff, like loves old movies. And so one thing that I really have to give my dad credit for is actually showing me and kind of like getting me excited about the world of movies and entertainment. And where we were on the south side of Chicago, like we just watched movies on television, and I didn't go to the theater. I didn't go to, we didn't go to see shows downtown. That was not part of my life at that point. But I think that kind of like love of film and love of those old movies really, really got me excited about entertainment. The only other career I ever like kind of really considered and thought about is for a period of time, I thought I wanted to be an architect, because I just love design and architecture. And so I've kind of kept that in my life in a different way, but entertainment, pretty focused on it fairly early. I didn't know exactly what part of the industry I'd want to be a part of, but always thought I want to go do that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. The architect is part of the creative brain. Now, what would you say was the film that really inspired you that your dad showed you?
Well, my dad loves black and white, like the black and white comedies of Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello and W.C. Fields, and he's a big Western buff. And so like that was my gateway drug basically into it all.
Way back.
But I would say the movie that really, I remember seeing it for the very first time, and I've seen it probably 100 times, was Singing in the Rain. I just remember thinking that movie was about the most perfect movie I could ever imagine, and just the joy of it. And it was a musical, but it took place in Hollywood. So it kind of combined two things that like I
right.
would want to be, try to be a part of. So it was about making a movie about a musical, but it was a musical as well. And so there was just something about the alchemy of that film and the, you know, the craftsmanship of it, the quality of it, everything about it, just really something just popped for me about that movie.
Yeah, when you look at your career and what you wound up doing, it almost makes perfect sense that that was the inspiration. Very interesting. Who would you say is the most influential figure, fictional or otherwise, in your childhood?
I mean, you know, I would say, I mean, in my real life, my mom is absolutely the most influential person to this day in my life. She's a really phenomenal human being and taught me a lot through her own actions, but also through teaching about values and how to treat people and how to work hard and, you know, how to care about other people. I mean, I think, you know, if I have some empath skills and the ability to work with artists and writers and collaborate and bring teams together, it's because I saw my mom do that every day in our very large household. So she is, you know, a very influential person for me. I read a lot of biographies when I was a kid. Like you know, I classically was very much a nerd. I didn't go outside that often or play outside. I read books, but I read a lot of biographies. I was very fascinated with like stories about actors and actresses and writers and directors. And early on became super fascinated with the story of Walt Disney, not Walt Disney World, because I hadn't been there yet, or any of that. I mean, I saw all those films and watched all the shorts when they were on the Mickey Mouse Club, but his personal story of building a studio and creating something that became a phenomenon and starting a company and, you know, having moments of absolute despair and getting to the brink of failure and then coming back from that. I thought there was a lot about, you know, the journey of Walt Disney that I thought was really fascinating and inspiring.
Right. Not only that, coming from Marceline, Missouri,
Exactly.
you know, very
Yeah.
apropos.
Yeah.
Great. So then take us to how you found yourself at Illinois Wesleyan. Can you kind of pinpoint the moment when you knew that that was the right school for you? And we're getting a photo now of you along with the cast of A Day in Hollywood from 1984.
Wow, that's crazy.
So,
Yeah, you know, I don't remember where else I even applied. I know that I applied and went to interview at other schools, but for me, it really crystallized. You know, sometimes it can take just one person, one meeting to really like snap, you know, make everything snap into place. And Dr. Carol Brandt ran the theater department at the time, and I drove down and I had an audition and met with her, and she just was this unbelievable human being, creative person, could just look into your soul. You know, she just had this unbelievable quality to her. And I knew the minute I met with her and spent time with her and auditioned for her that I wanted to go to Illinois Wesleyan. At the time, I think it was also the only, or the only, and certainly one of the best, if there were more, music theater programs in the country. And I knew that I wanted to go to school for music and theater. And it, you know, was famous for the quality of that specific program. And there was just the campus really, like, I loved it. I felt immediately at home and immediately like it was the place I was going to, you know, spend the next 4 years. So I barely remember where else I applied or if there were other things that I was even considering, because it just felt like I was kind of meant to go to Wesleyan.
yeah, I can totally relate. The campus just kind of gives off that that vibe, and you mentioned making connections. The fact that the faculty is so tight knit and relatable was, you know, was always a big draw for me as well. So as we all know, college is a little bit of a journey. Did your ambitions change at all once you made it to school? And was there like a turning point or a key lesson that you still find yourself drawing on today that that kind of goes back to that time in your life?
No, nothing changed for me. If anything, the experience I had at Wesleyan and the friends that I met there and the experiences with the productions I was a part of, both, on stage and behind the scenes, like all of that, like work that we did together, it just reinforced A, my love of it, and B, my desire to go and try to pursue it in New York. I was very focused on going to New York after school. I briefly flirted with, should I go to grad school? Because of course, that's one of the things that you're thinking when you're at school is you just keep going.
Right.
But, and I worked at a few places in the summers, like summer theaters, or I worked at a theme park, and that gives you a taste of, and you meet other people from other schools, and even people who are like then moving to New York or moving to LA. And so in some ways, getting out and pushing yourself out, and also people who graduated, alumni of Wesleyan, were in LA or in New York and were out there and trying to do it. So it made it all feel quite possible, there's so much fear and there's so many barriers, and where will you live and how will you afford it and where will you work when you go to New York? But there were others that had done it before me. And I did, probably the thing that really paved the road for me is I did an internship through what was called the Great Lakes College Association. We, a lot of the students in the music and theater programs actually went to New York and worked in casting offices. I worked at an acting studio, just lots of different places where that was where I spent my last semester. And it was a very easy and organic transition to then staying in New York after that.
Yeah, the internships are really so key, and alumni connections as well. I remember people telling me about coming out to LA. I had similar worries of like, where am I going to live? And people were just like, just get here and you'll learn as you go, essentially. So
yeah.
Okay, so then you mentioned New York. Can you take us through that journey from graduation to NYC and then eventually to Hollywood?
Yeah. Well, I was in New York from 85 to 91. So relatively, in some ways, a short amount of time compared to how long now I've mostly been in California. And, I was catering and waiting tables and doing absolutely every temp job to make ends meet while also auditioning and trying to get work. And I worked as an actor, mostly in musicals, while I was in New York quite a bit. And, I didn't, it's funny, like I don't remember, certainly I never made a decision to move to LA. I actually just kind of was on the plane to visit LA. Actually, I think I was going to see, Andy was there and other friends that I knew from school and from life were there. And I was on the plane on the way there and I just knew I was going to move there. So my vacation in LA turned out to be like, okay, I'm going to look for an apartment and I'm going to quit my job and try to get a job. Like all that just kind of seemed to make sense. There's a part of me that's like a diehard New Yorker, even though I've not lived there. I've spent a lot of time there. I'm such a New Yorker. I love New York. I love everything about the experience of being in New York.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just was, doing what you do when you're starting your career. I was wanting to work and worked a bunch and got to work with some really great people and some really, amazing shows, and mostly musicals in New York and on tour. And then, but I think I always kind of thought I wanted to be a producer or a director, probably annoyingly so to producers and directors I worked with when I was an actor. I always kind of was wondering what their job was and thinking about what they were doing and thinking about the, direction they would be giving. And so I kind of, it was either a combination of always thinking that seemed like a really cool thing to do. And then in a weird way, like, I think to be an actor, to be a successful actor, like it has to be that thing that you wake up every single day and you have to do it. It's just, you know, it's burning in your soul that you must be on stage or on film. And you must be then willing also to accept the many sacrifices that come along with pursuing, you know, a career as a performer.
Sure.
And I think I had a piece of that, but I didn't maybe, I was honest with myself that I didn't have that same, you know, like I had other friends who were like, oh my God, that person has to be a performer. I'm not sure that I actually had that. And I mean, I think I was pretty good actually, but I don't know that I ever felt like I was great at anything when I was being an actor. And I thought I'd rather help other people be great. I'd rather provide opportunities for other people to shine and try to create environments where people could do amazing work than maybe feeling like I would fall short of that myself if I stayed as an actor.
Right, that makes sense. Sometimes it's just the closeness to the process and just wanting to be involved and kind of have a bit more control. I know exactly what you're talking about. So then what's the transition from being an actor to then being a PA on some of these now really big name films that, you know, are really key in my childhood, like Prince of Egypt, and before that, Pocahontas at Disney?
Yeah. Well, I had been living in LA for probably 3 or 4 years at that point, and I was still performing. I would still do shows all the time, and I did a bunch of like commercials and TV stuff as well. But I really finally like hit that, like, okay, I gotta go work for a producer if I think I want to be a producer. So back in those days, you would like call these phone lines that would tell you like what jobs were available. This was pre-internet and pre-cell phone days, but you would like call and you could listen to like assistant to the producer on Mulan, you know, and you could hear like what jobs were available. So I applied for a job at Disney. I always loved animation and always loved, and it just seemed like a company that you could go work for. And I didn't get the first job that I applied for there, but then that woman, who's a good friend of mine now actually, and a colleague of mine at Netflix, she recommended me to the producer of Pocahontas. And they were in the last year of production, and they were looking for somebody to come and be the like assistant, the central assistant PA in the office. And it was like a very exciting, crazy time to join a movie. It was during previews. And we were like going to theaters and previewing the movie and doing the notes, and, you know, like in a room taking the notes with people, you know, who are giants like, you know, Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz, and the directors, and Tom Schumacher and Peter Snyder, and Jeffrey Katzenberg had just famously left Disney at that point, so he was no longer there. But it was really incredible to like witness that and be like, you know, there were 11 people in the room, 10 of them were famous, and it was me taking all the notes and like trying to figure out how to turn it into an action plan for the production. So that was my last year there. And in that last year, then Dreamworks announced and opened. And one other friend of mine from Disney had gone there and had started there. I went and I had an interview, and I got hired as a PA in the production office on the Prince of Egypt.
Wow, that's an
Kind of
incredible story in and of itself.
Just kind of happened, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of that whole entire process, I recently watched the documentary. I think it's called Waking Sleeping Beauty on Disney Plus. It kind of talks about that whole, you know, that time period and journey. So that was really helpful in prepping for this interview. Definitely a very interesting time in animation.
It was also like a lesson for me also, in like how there's people in your life that kind of come in and out of your life, and the relationships you build as you go through your career. I did a production of Godspell in New York when I was an actor, and Stephen Schwartz became a friend, and like, you know, he and I kept in touch throughout the years. I found myself in LA, and he was working on Pocahontas. He didn't get me the job. I got the job independently. But then when I got there, one of the things that was clear what was happening was there was a lot of friction in the team. And so I kind of probably was put into a role to try to help bring everybody together to get things done, because some of that friction was actually with the producers themselves. And so there was a lot of like, trying to help move things forward. And then I went to DreamWorks, and Stephen wrote the music and the lyrics to The Prince of Egypt. So it's just that thing where you go, okay, well, the guy who's, one of the key contributors is going to say, this guy, yeah, he'll do a great job. You should definitely hire him. Those kinds of acknowledgments in your career make a big difference if if someone has a positive experience of you.
Absolutely, like especially this business, but I'm sure most businesses, it seems to all be about relationships. The fact that yours was with Steven Schwartz is, like totally amazing, but it's all very relatable, and I think is great for the students listening as well. Okay, so then we talked about PA work. So then how, this is probably the most interesting transition on my list here, but how does a PA transition to DreamWorks producer and making the leap all the way to chief creative officer?
I will say 20 years goes really fast. Like it actually, when I think about the fact that I worked there for 20 years, it all felt like one big, giant, long experience. It was a very exciting time to be at the company. There was a lot of growth, a lot of ambition. I will say, like, one thing, I'm a super hard worker. I really am a super, super hard worker. I think, maybe a little bit of it is I didn't have, quote unquote, like a real job for a long time. And then I got a real job. And once I had it, I was like, oh, I love having this real job. I love going to work every day. I love, doing this stuff and trying to make a difference in my job. But I also was a 30-year-old PA who was switching my career. And I think having been in a performance track and having been a performer and an artist in some ways, like I actually had an understanding of artists, and I had an understanding of writers and directors and performers, and hopefully an ease with them and a desire to make them successful, because it's I think artists are frequently very afraid and scared, and they want to do a great job. And when you're the manager, like there's a lot of those dynamics that come up. So I always try to like be the, even though, yes, I had these titles and I had these roles there, I always worked in a way that was like, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to make this happen. We're going to get it done. And if you apply yourself that way, then it just, it does then end up, if you do good work, sometimes the reward for good work is you get to do more work, like that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. And sometimes when you can go in and help solve problems, you get bigger problems to solve. And that's just kind of like what happens when you're working in companies. But yeah, it was also a very, very unique time at that company. But that happens all the time. If you were at the beginning of Netflix or Amazon or any of the streamers right now, all of my friends who work at those companies and all of the people who were there at the beginning would say the same exact thing. So it's not relegated to this thing that happened in 1995. There's versions of those growth opportunities that come all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. You hit on one interesting point. So when you were switching careers and you started as a PA, you mentioned you were 30 at that time. Did you feel like a disadvantage in your age, or was it more, more of an advantage because of the experience that you had had?
I mean, I thought of it as an advantage, I think, this is like one of those things where, and this is my mom, these are my mom's words, like in me, which is, I always try to, take whatever job I would take on, I would take it on with the goal of doing amazing job at it. And I think, one of those, this is like now boring old person giving advice, but it's, it is the advice I do give to people sometimes, because you don't really know, and anybody who, sometimes I think I find people spend a lot of time going, well, how does this apply to what I want to really do later on? Or this job doesn't really relate to the thing that I'm going to be doing later. Well, I don't think you know that. I certainly didn't know it. All I knew was that if I did a great job over here, there would be an organic like lift to the next thing that I was doing. And also, the more you apply yourself, the more you learn about how it feels to apply yourself. So whether I was the PA on Pocahontas, which was, lovely at times doing notes and being in rooms with a lot of people, it was also going in all day Saturday and running tons of reports and running tons of schedules and numbers and getting everybody beverages for the breakfast meetings. And, I never looked at any of that as something that that I shouldn't be doing, and doing really, really well. So I think that's the, you don't know where it's going to lead. And I found myself over time going, oh, I'm so glad that I'm so glad that I worked my way up in this business and that I've had all these jobs, because I kind of know what most people do in a lot of the departments now. And I'm really curious about people like, I love post-production. I'm like totally obsessed with post-production. When I first I remember being at Dreamworks, like some of that stuff is hard and technical and very boring and very labor intensive. But like, I love I love editorial, I love editors, I love all that stuff, and like learned it all. Like, you really remained curious about all of the departments and all of the people who worked in them.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because I think when you're just a young person who's really interested in entertainment, you don't really know what opportunities there even are out there sometimes. So, just kind of getting involved with the industry, you find, like you said, you can never really know what you might be interested in until you get there. And I hear so many people being hesitant to kind of change their career path, even if they think they might be interested in something else, just because they're like, oh no, I'm too old, or I do this, and they're putting themselves in this box. So that's why I was interested and wanted to hear kind of about how you made that happen for yourself. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, we were talking earlier that one of my first temp jobs was at Capitol Records, that I was telling you, just so when I took that job, like I love music, but I thought, how is working for the head of marketing, international marketing at Capitol Records ever going to matter or add up to the other parts of, well, first of all, I worked in a really busy office with a lot of really interesting people. I learned a lot about the record industry. They were marketing major titles on a worldwide basis. Like 12 years later, I'm at Dreamworks, and we were meeting with people about doing the soundtracks for our movies. And we were meeting with my old boss from Capitol Records about doing the soundtrack for our film. And I knew everything about international marketing of an album at that point. So I had no idea that job working for Capitol would, both in relationship, but also in a practical, like, how do we roll this thing out internationally? And what does it mean to work in different territories? And what does it mean to be global? And what does it mean to think about different audiences and translations and all of the things you have to deal with, when you're making entertainment? All entertainment we make right now is global. Like everybody, that's probably the biggest shift of the last, 10 years, but entertainment is global. And the people who think about it globally, I think, are succeeding.
Absolutely. And just understanding the process as a whole, like you were saying earlier, and students who are listening, if you're ever wondering, why do I have to go to Light Hang? I'm going to be an actor. Like this, that's the reason why, because everything's all connected in the industry. So great points. Okay, I want to go on to our next question. How have you faced and overcome adversity in your career?
I mean, I think just by working and keeping going, I definitely am someone who likes to be busy and likes to work. And so I do think that has saved me in those moments when it just feels like everything's falling apart. I'm also super practical, which is like some days you can't accomplish things. Some days you can't get things done, but do something. Make the list of what you're going to do the next day. We certainly have had theater is very hard. Theater is incredibly hard. Making movies that are gigantic and super expensive, and the fate of the entire company hangs in the balance on the opening weekend. I've been in both versions where it goes great, and I've been in the other version where it goes really bad. So the same work ethic and the same process and the same thinking applies in both situations. Every movie that we worked at Dreamworks and every show I've worked on, we're trying to make something great that will appeal and touch people and entertain people. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't mean, at least I've tried to tell myself, it doesn't mean you should reassess everything about how you do things. You just really need to push through and keep going. There's a great, I think it was Hal Prince who says, like, what do you do the day after an opening night? I start working on the next show, because that's like that's I think what keeps you healthy and sane, and a perspective on going forward.
Right. Well, speaking of the process and keeping moving forward, can you tell us, like, what does the day-to-day actually look like as a producer, both in the different spheres of Broadway and in LA in the film industry? Because I think at least I am, we're all a little bit curious, like, what does a producer actually do?
Yeah. Well, I right now, it might be like the context. It changes. There's like seasons of it, but and this year, of course, has been unique in a way that none of us could ever have imagined. But I would say now that we're like kind of planning for the shows to restart. I'm an independent producer right now, so I work on different shows with different teams. So I have Moulin Rouge, which we're relaunching in New York, a tour, Australia and the West End, and then further down the line, Germany and other territories as well. We're doing the tour of the Prom this fall that'll go out in October. I'm developing a movie that just was officially moved forward at Netflix. So right now it's a little like hodgepodge lodge, like every day is like 6 and 7 a.m. calls with London about casting in the West End. And then part of the film I'm working on, we have team members who are working in Cape Town. So we do a lot of morning meetings with them as well. The afternoon then is filled up with LA and New York stuff. But right now, there's nothing that's actually running. It's all marketing, production, like getting the company back together to do Moulin Rouge, getting everybody back into deals, figuring out the production schedule, rehearsal schedules. There's just a lot of logistics. So there's big teams, like there's a team on Moulin Rouge, and we have a team on the Prom, and then we have the Netflix project. And then I have a couple other projects I'm developing for the future that are just starting out as well. So it's a mix of, you definitely have to be like a Swiss Army knife. You have to be, a little bit good at a lot of things, and keep all the balls in the air, and a lot of communication. Right now, especially because we live in this pandemic world, communication, consistency with the teams, bringing people together, getting through what are super challenging times for everybody. You're trying to keep everybody just motivated to move forward and focus on the possibilities and the really great benefits of what we're about to all do together, because it's daunting and people have been at home and actors are not in condition to do shows right now, and people's kids are at home with them. I mean, every single thing that makes it hard to be inspired and hard to get excited about going back to work are against what we're about to all try to do.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. One of the things that really kind of kept me going at one of the points that pandemic fatigue really was setting in was the Prom, the movie based on the musical. So that's one thing that I really wanted to talk about. So what was it like to tell an uplifting LGBTQ plus story, highlighting members of the community in some of the leading roles? Because for me, that was incredible to see.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it all was kind of an unbelievable experience, you know, throughout. It is, you know, I will say it was the hardest thing ever to work on for a very long time, because, you know, in some ways it's like the worst pitch ever. And so raising the money for this show and getting the theater and getting it produced, you know, when you're talking to somebody about commercial theater, and a lot of people who focus on commercial theater, in some ways, the opposite of Moulin Rouge, which is like the easiest pitch in the world in some ways, in terms of all of those other factors. You know, when you go, well, telling a story about these lesbians who want to go to the prom, but that like literally you start telling this story, like, what is this thing? What is it? And the show then was the only thing that really sold the show. Certainly we had an amazing creative team. We had Casey Nicola. We had an incredible cast in the New York production, and that production we developed over a long period of time, but it was really an underdog in a lot of ways. Kind of like, in some ways, it was a little bit like our lead character, Emma, you know, a little bit not sure like if it's going to work out. And so it was a long, long process. And, but the joy of the show and the kind of sweet and spicy nature of it, like the sweetness of the center, the chewy heart of Emma and Alyssa, and Emma and Barry's relationship, and then like the salty, tart, acidic Broadway stuff that actually then also had a heart to it as well. I think that was a winning combination, and the reason why people loved it so much in New York, and why, you know, it did as well as it did. And I think it really touched and moved people. Ryan Murphy came to see it, wanted to do it immediately. We made the deal in a minute. He had a window in his schedule. He wanted to do it. Meryl Streep signed up like in a minute. Nicole Kidman signed up in a minute. It all went so fast. Movies never come together like that. They always take forever, especially one with the schedules of those people involved. But that's just the power, the sheer will of Ryan saying, I want to tell this story. I'm from Indiana. This is my story, and I'm going to make it. And we're going to start shooting it in December of this year. And it just, you know, it kind of then was meant to be. And it was, we, you know, technically we finished production on the prom on March 10th of 2019. And we didn't actually finish. We still had like 5 days left to get. And then everything got shut down on that Monday. We were filming at a high school in Los Angeles that all the permits got revoked because they didn't want any outside people at the schools. The school district shut down at the end of the following week. So, and the prom was the first film that went back into production in August of last year, and we were able to get those last few days and then release the movie in time for the holidays. So it was nice to have something uplifting. It was nice to have something joyful. Especially in a movie year where so many of the stories were so dark and so, you know, sad and wonderful films, but there was not a lot of hope and joy in some of the films this year. It was nice to have a film that had that kind of buoyancy and life and I think message.
Absolutely. I loved it so much. I had to watch it again last night after having watched it earlier when it came out, but I was just, you know, struck by Ryan's vision of it, but just the relatability, and it reminded me of how I felt. I haven't had the pleasure of seeing the show live, but I did see the Macy's Day Parade performance, and what that meant to just see that LGBT moment come to me in my home with my family, you know, and it really kind of brought the message of the story together. So very impactful. And also
scandal with that one, but yeah.
What's that?
We caused a little scandal with that. But
oh yeah. Yeah, but you know, it's kind of like the message of the story itself. Sometimes we have to cause a little scandal to you know, to make some change, and thankfully this story was it was a way to kind of tie in the joy of the community alongside the struggle and the challenge. So I really loved seeing that. So you already talked a little bit about working with Ryan Murphy. What was the kind of the process of transitioning from the stage to becoming the Netflix film? Like, what are some of the logistics of that?
Well, everybody was involved. So the writers who wrote the play, wrote the script. There's definitely some new material. You know, you just ask yourselves about like how you can widen the scope of the story. You know, the show itself is somewhat modest, even though it's a big Broadway musical. It's somewhat small and somewhat contained. So it was nice to kind of like get it out of the box a little bit and open with a big giant, you know, moment in New York at a Broadway theater, and it just you can just think about it in a way, because you're cutting all over the place. And I think the real question was about opening up and adding some characters that were mentioned in the show that logistically, it's all of Broadway is so much about your running costs, and so each additional person you have in the company just means it's more expensive to run the show on a weekly basis. And we wanted to make the prom in a way that would be efficient, so that if we could be successful, that we would be able to pay back our investors and all of those, important factors of running the show. But we were able to have like Emma's grandmother, who she lived with, and Barry's mom was in the movie, in very, very small parts, but impactful, really impactful parts, because you get to meet characters who are important in the storytelling, and important, and I think that made a big difference.
Definitely. I didn't even realize that those characters were not in the stage production. It reminds me of what they did with the kind of the reverse, the Steel Magnolias. Well, I guess it was the same path from stage to film, including like the male characters. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then as the future begins to look just a little brighter, what's the next project that you're most excited to tackle? I remember seeing on Instagram this morning, I think it was, that Moulin Rouge is coming back in September. So I assume you're very excited about that.
I am very excited to finally be able to have some certainty about it, because lack of certainty makes especially creative people crazy. So the fact that we now at least have a target that we're all aiming for, a bunch of Moulin Rouges, a prom tour. The movie at Netflix that I've been developing is going to move into a more advanced stage of kind of pre-production and production as the rest of the year goes on. I actually have a new musical that I'm developing with Stephen Schwartz and a playwright named Lindsay Fiorentino. We've just begun. We're kind of at the very, very beginning, but we've been meeting and talking about it for about 6 months now, and I'm excited. I'm excited to start on a new. It's nice to have things that are in different stages. Actually, it's really nice to have something that's at the very beginning, because it helps balance the kinds of meetings you have at the very beginning are very different than like day-to-day marketing and sales meetings when you're trying to reopen or open a show. So it's a nice, more balanced plate in some ways.
Well, that is exciting. I can't wait to hear more about the Stephen Schwartz project. I'm a big fan. So, okay. So then my last question before we move on to so maybe questions from the audience. What advice would you give your younger self, or to some of our recent graduates tuning in?
These are always the hardest ones for me. I mean, I know it's so, I do know it's so dull to say, but I do think, think about, taking on whatever opportunities or roles or positions or jobs that come your way, take them on with like just a lot of gratitude and a lot of like joy and work ethic, and just really, really, really throw yourself into it. Because I think, you want to be memorable, when you're in your role, when you're in your job, when you're in a show, and you want to be memorable in a really good way. And so I think the people who really like approach it with that kind of open-heartedness and joy and work ethic are always, you always get more out of it if you approach it that way. And I do think that, probably now something that's required in the world in a very, very different and pronounced way is I see this a lot right now in the film and TV industry and in theater as well. I think there's a lot of us and them kind of things going on. We're in a very intense moment for so many reasons that are absolutely valid. I try to approach them myself in a way that, like, I use that phrase, open-hearted. They're really, especially what we do, creating theater or creating film and TV, it requires endless amounts of trust. It just requires so much trust, and trust can only come from the place of being able to actually look and embrace and experience people and not prejudge them or prejudge their experiences. And I think we're all going to have to do that even more as we come back into spaces and come back into safe spaces to create theater and create film and television. It require everyone to kind of like meet in that safe space together to do that. And I have my own just journey I'm on with the productions I'm working on right now and the some of the things we're doing. But I see right now, everyone's been away from each other for so long. It's so easy to think to be everyone else is like on the other side. It's like we went right from an election cycle and a country that was so divided into, I think, an artistic community that has various versions of that, whether it's actors versus managers or unions versus actors or whatever all the dividing points are right now, and all the racial reckoning, which is very much needed, and the conversation needs to happen. But people I think, need to come from a place of trust and open-heartedness in order to make real change.
Yeah, that's such a great point, especially with the, I've even seen that with the streaming versus going to the theater in person. I think there's a nice way that all of this new world can fit together. So that's definitely something we should focus on. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of my questions. Andy, if you want to come back up to the stage.
What a great discussion, you guys. Thank you so much. I learned, I've known Bill for 40 years, and it was great I'm learning new stuff here. So this is cool. Yeah, you're getting some great comments and questions. Please consider, if you have a question, pop it in here. We've got a few minutes left. Bill, here's one from Curtis Kelch. What was the most complicated production that you've been involved with? Why was it so complicated or crazy, and how did you handle it?
I think Shrek the Musical was pretty complicated. It was complicated as a physical production. It was complicated because of the expectations. I've worked on like movies that have become shows, and I've worked on shows that were original that's become movies. And so I've kind of seen things go both directions. That one was complicated because, there may have been no possible way to be successful at it in some ways at the time, because we were coming after The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. And so there was this expectation that then now Dreamworks is going to be in this business and, going to do something like that. And while the show has had great success all over the world in the 12 years or whatever that it's been since we opened it, it was a really complicated production, like getting the prosthetics right, getting the costumes right, getting the scenery right. And then we had people, part of the creative team was in London and part of the creative team was in New York. And then there was a giant studio involved and a giant expectation, and not a general like the New York theater press was not like excited about it. They kind of thought it was just a big commercial effort and we were doing it to like make a fast dollar. no one makes theater to make a quick dollar. Nobody, there's no such thing in theater as that. So yeah, it was really hard. And I think the way we got through it is we just kept working on it. I mean, we did it out of town in Seattle. We opened it in New York. Even after we opened in New York, we put new material into it. When we put it on the road, we changed the opening. That was a far superior experience, I think, for the audience. That became the version that we did in London. London, we made more. So, I think I was coming from a world of animation where you just keep working on it until it's done. And the thing about live theater is that's different people have different points of view about when that moment happens. So it was like just hanging in there and continuing to work on it. But it was really challenging. And we opened in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis as well. So we were opening, on top of it at the worst moment to open a big giant family musical.
I remember seeing it and thinking, even just how would you determine what Shrek would look like in real 3D world, that itself would have been a challenge.
Yeah.
This question comes from Sarah Weinstein Edwards. And it's really interesting. With the advent of streaming and the competition among streaming outlets, it's a really exciting time to be involved in creating content that can cross platforms. She mentions the Prom success on Broadway and on Netflix. Are you now developing projects, Bill, with potential cross-platform opportunities as the goal? You sort of mentioned the globe is your new audience. What kinds of stories are at the top of your list for projects you'd like to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll call it the training that I got working at Dreamworks was that everything we did, we thought of it being everywhere. We didn't achieve that with everyone. We achieved it with a lot of them. But when we were making films, we thought, okay, how will this go into television? How will this go into gaming? And is there a live application to it? And so there was a lot of rigor in our team about thinking about things as IP and thinking about them as franchises. And, while that's a lot harder to sometimes get right, it did just flex the brain muscles I have to think of things that way. So when we were developing the Prom, I always either thought we will even on Shrek the Musical, we did a live capture of Shrek the Musical. The reason Shrek the Musical is considered a success is that we filmed it way before Hamilton did and sold it to Netflix early in the days of Netflix for a lot of money because they were hungry for content. And at that point, we just pushed through and figured out a way to film the show. And it's the reason it does so well, I think, in regional theaters and community theaters is that people see it on Netflix and can kind of see how they might do it themselves. And so I always think what are the other ways in which we can make sure that the project lives on beyond that initial experience. So yeah, pretty much everything that I'm doing right now, I'm thinking, do we start it as theater and do we film it later? Or do we start it as a TV project and is there a live application for it in the future? Because I think you want to maximize the time that it takes to create something and get it made. If you can then broaden it and maximize it, I think brings great value to the creators. And I think the audiences love it. Not everything is Star Wars and not everything is a Marvel movie,
right?
But people, I think people want to feel connected to the stories and the characters if they love something. And with streaming, you don't need to have the biggest audience. You just need to have an audience. And so continuing to speak to that audience is really important.
I think that's such a great point too about knowing the story and knowing the characters early on, because thinking back, some of my earliest theater experiences were those Disney productions. So sometimes it's an avenue into theater itself when you don't really know what that whole shebang's about.
Mm-hmm.
Kira West writes in to say that you've not aged a bit, and what's your secret to that?
I think I have a filter on Zoom.
Yes, Vaseline on the lens, right? That's so neat. Here's a nice comment from Ann Harding. Your speech as the distinguished alum in 2016, coming from the place of yes, was so inspiring, and she'll always remember it. I must say that I talk to people here all the time that I wasn't here for your speech, but I've seen it on video, and it's such a great speech, Bill, and I love it. And it's left a long impact.
Yeah, I guess that is my advice. Really, is that again, it's the same. I used to say this all the time. I used to say it in story meetings, actually, because we're also good at like pointing out why things might not work. That is for ourselves, for our own personal journeys and our relationships. It's really easy to like call somebody out on what's not right or what's broken or what needs to get better. And in story meetings, like you could be like a bunch of writers and a bunch of story artists on an animated movie, and someone would pitch an idea like, oh, what if like the gingerbread man, da 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 da, and it's so easy for them. Well, yeah, but that won't work because da 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 da. Like like it's so easy for people to go there. And so I had this rule. We actually put a big banner up in the story room saying, you must pitch 10 reasons why that could work before you tell us why it can't work. And so it became like a bit of a motto in our story pitch rooms. Like,
So
you're
great.
not allowed to say why it's not going to work. You're not allowed to say why it's not going to be possible. You have to say how it could work first. And then you can criticize it too, but you've got to give us a yes first. Yeah.
That's revolutionary, Bill. That's really, really good. Bill, do you ever miss any of your jobs from your carefree early days? Those are the ones I remember with you. Or do you still have nightmares that you're late for work for one of those jobs?
You mean like Long John Silver's or Burger King?
Yes.
I worked
Yeah.
at those places. Yeah, I mean, I would say being an independent producer now and kind of freelancing, especially in the world of, the pandemic and COVID and all of us being at home, I every now and then go, oh gosh, when I worked at Dreamworks, like I knew what to do every day. Like the day somewhat carried me, like you
Sure.
could almost just like grab on at the beginning of the morning and be pulled through the day because there's just so much to respond to. When you're independent and you're the producer, you have to wake up every day and go to bed every night thinking about what you need to do tomorrow and in the next week and in the next month and in the next 6 months. And so it just requires it. But every now and then lately, I'm like, oh gosh, I really liked it when I just went in and Carol Sue told me what to do during the day and
Yes.
told me what to do at night to be ready for the next day. I miss that. I miss, a little bit of that. And I miss being in big rooms, collaborating on things with people and having those communal moments where you've reached a milestone together. You have them less when you're freelancing a lot and working on a lot of different projects. But no, I don't miss Long John Silver's. No.
I remember you always telling me a story about eating the crumblies out of the thing at the end.
Yeah, the crumblies and sauce, yeah.
What are you reading? What are your favorite books? And Hannah, I want to hear yours too, by the way, as someone who also works at Disney.
Oh my gosh, favorite books. Okay, let Bill go first.
Yeah.
I feel sad to say that I don't read that many books. I buy a lot of books and they sit there.
Yeah.
But I read so much for my job. Like I read so many scripts and I read so many, things and notes, and that sometimes by the end of the night I don't have the brain left to like actually
Sure.
read a book. But I do. I just I've been rereading a play by Jane Wagner that Lily Tomlin performed in, Search for Signs of Intelligence.
Yes.
The Universe.
Yes.
Read that a few times recently, just because. Been talking about maybe trying to do a version of that again at some point in the world. And I have a book called The Prophets sitting here that I'm taking on a plane trip, which I just ordered, which someone recommended to me.
Cool.
Well,
Hannah, you got a quick...
I identify with what you said earlier about biographies. I really enjoy reading those. I read Julie Andrews' homework earlier this year, and right now I'm reading Vanity Fair's Women on Women, which is a series of profiles which are very interesting because it kind of spans different time periods. It's not all current profiles. It's, this one's from the 1980s or whatever, so it's I'm about to start Nicole Kidman next. So
Oh, wow. That's great. I'm reading the Julie Andrews book as we speak too. Yeah. Do you, I think I know the answer to this. Do you prefer to work with the same design team, Bill? Do you keep colleagues close and work? I know you and Dory, certainly are a pair that work well together.
It's different. The design team is definitely part of like the directorial decision, although it's definitely a collaboration. I don't think I've worked with the same design team on any of the theater projects that I've had. So we have Derek McLean on Moulin Rouge, Scott Pask was on The Prom, David Rockwell, and so different people on all of them. And generally that tends to be a collaboration that the director is super keen to have that choice. When Dreamworks is different because people work at the studio. And so sometimes you would find like a winning formula and those people would then like go on to do something else together. And it's a 3 to 5 year commitment for people. And so, you have to really like the people you work with. But we had a lot of the same designers work on film, from film to film there, but also a lot of new people. I think, what makes something new and fresh and exciting, I think, is sometimes mixing up who you work with, and not just like working with the same people all the time. I've worked with Dory on 2 projects, but I have a different partner on Moulin Rouge, and I'll have a different partner on this new project I'm working on. And that keeps you sharp too. It just keeps you, the thing we all do, I think, when we go from job to job is we all have our bag of tricks, we bring with us. Like, this is how I do my job. And then we get there and there's a bunch of new people and we're not sure what tricks they all have in their bags. And so sometimes it's really good to get some new people with new bags and have everybody put all their stuff in the middle of the table and go, oh, is that how, oh, it's really nice to like engage with new collaborators in a way and really understand how they do their jobs and shift your own way of doing it so that you can be a different kind of team member.
It's cool. I just looked at the time and we're after the hour. It's gone so quickly as I knew it would, and you guys made it seamless and flow really beautifully. Perhaps we could ask one more question. This is interesting for Wesleyan, Bill. They're working really hard. We're working really hard to launch a film studies major here. And I saw some of their films just, that they did at the end of the semester here, and they were great. What classes would you feel are crucial for students and this type of a program?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I feel qualified to weigh in on that. I mean, this is for people who are filmmakers, who are actually people who are actually making film themselves, directors primarily.
Yes, I think it's to teach people both sides. So there's acting for the camera, but then the actors also know how to be behind a camera too and direct and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think everybody should really learn about how to read and break down a script and script studies, because a script is different than a play, very different than a play. And I remember some of the play directorial breakdown classes we had at Wesleyan. I remember all of my different colored highlighters and using them to break down. That kind of approach to how to look at a script, analyze a script, pull information from the script if you're the actor and that's all you're going to get, pull information if you're the director and that's all you're going to get. And I think that would be really helpful, because I feel like I meet a lot of people. I'm surprised sometimes how hard scripts are to read and what a special skill it is. And so I think like actually learning how to read and do critique of a script and talk about it. And then I think, certainly studying other films is always a great way for aspiring filmmakers. It's like what made a film work, and as well, what makes films that don't work. Like, why don't they work? But I'd love to, spend more time on that answer and talk separately if that's helpful.
Great. I know that the folks on the faculty here that are part of that would love to take you up on that. Hannah, do you have anything? I'm gonna close this out here.
I don't think so. I was going to say I totally agree with Bill's answer, because one of my favorite classes, and I'm struggling to remember the actual name of the class, but it was all about looking at the text and, you know, why things work and visualizing how it could be on stage or on film. In some cases, we actually watched, you know, film of the piece that we were reading, and that was taught by Ron Emmons. I believe he's retired now, but it was a fantastic class.
Thank you, guys. I want to just say thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Bill, for your time this evening. Thanks for participating and engaging in this conversation, and for your commitment to Illinois Wesleyan and giving back in this way. It means so much to those of us that are here and those of us that still love this place. And thanks to everyone who watched and who took part in the discussion. It was really wonderful to be with you as well this evening and this episode of the Titan Talks webinar series. For additional information about upcoming Titan Talks, be sure to visit the link on the website and the screen that we're sharing now. I think there's a slide there for you. But it was wonderful to be together. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their night.
Great.
Thank you, Andy and Bill.
Take good care. Bill, super. Bye, Hannah.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill.